A letter arrived for the protagonist, addressed to Darrett, saying they had not seen each other for a long time, that 10 years had passed, and that military wanted him to come to the capital. Folding the letter, he looked away and forced a smile as nostalgia washed over him. A few days before the event, the incident happened in Ration at the Blacksmith's Guild. A voice asked what they had told him. He was the main character. He asked whether he had really been fired and wanted to know why. The words clearly upset him. Across from him stood a man with a girl on his arm. The man started shouting that his work in the guild brought no benefit. Darrett did not defend himself. Darrett was shocked by the man's words. The protagonist apologized and asked for a clearer explanation, but the guild leader said he simply had a very poor price-to-quality ratio. It turned out to be Guildmaster Sinon, who said that was his reason for firing Darrett and that he had many things to do, so Darrett should leave quickly. Darrett did not argue and said he was leaving. Sinon was glad everything went smoothly. Sticking out his tongue, he said happily, "Good riddance to him." Deciding to go to the capital, the protagonist climbed into the carriage and they drove off. The coachman announced their arrival, and at that moment Tourette told the boy he had fixed his thing. Beaming, the child held the toy in his hands. He began talking about the horse moving. The woman beside him smiled at the child. As the protagonist left the cart, the boy thanked him and called him Grandpa. Darrett reflected on how much time he'd spent on blacksmithing. After 30 years of this work, he was now quite old, and at the same time reached up toward the sky and watched it closely. Darrett arrived in the Kingdom of Gloss, more precisely in its capital. The city was not very large, surrounded by mountains and forests. Walking the city streets, the protagonist looked around and noticed more people than on his last visit. On reflection, he hadn't really left anything written. Leaving was a good opportunity. Feeling better, he began humming a tune. A stall caught his eye. He walked over and asked the saleswoman what she recommended. She said the wild boar shashlik was good, so he bought one. After paying, he picked up the skewer of meat and began to eat. It was clearly still hot, but Darrett was enjoying it immensely and said it was delicious. The woman told him she had not seen him before, then asked where he came from, and the protagonist said he came from Written. He said he had worked in the Blacksmith's Guild, but had been fired, and at that moment people shouted that the other man did not know how much the falchion was worth. Furious, the girl held the sword's remains and said it couldn't even cut the tip of a branch. The young man replied sharply that she simply did not know how to use it, and his irritation was clear. The protagonist immediately asked what was happening and whether it was really an argument. The woman explained it was coming from the gun shop. The saleswoman said their weapons don't have a good reputation. The main character chuckled and thought to himself that people like that are everywhere. Darrett said he would take a quick look, thanked her for the delicious food, and the woman told him to be careful. The customer kept yelling that the man had told her the sword was steel and could handle the plant monster, and then he asked whether he had actually sold her a fake. The arms dealer said she had no evidence, while he wore an evil grin and a slightly furious expression. Angry that he was right, the girl felt the situation was unfair, and the child then turned to her, called her mom, and suggested they stop arguing and leave. By now the main character had moved closer to the scene and looked at the sword stump, wondering whether the man really meant he was made of steel. Darrett turned to the arms dealer and said lying was wrong, drawing the attention of both the disputants and the crowd. He said he was a blacksmith too, and that the sword was fake, not steel but tin. The arms dealer immediately pointed at him and insisted nothing like that could happen, calling it slander. The main character approached the woman and asked to hold the object for a moment. She agreed, and he said this was the proof. Darrett said everything on the blade itself is visible, and the ripples are clear. If steel were inside, the trace would be straight. In the crowd, people were already saying a blacksmith they knew had told them the same thing. It was clear the main character was telling the truth. Someone decided to call the guard. The arms dealer grew furious and passed out dirty, and Darrett said the man was fooling people and exploiting their ignorance. The protagonist was serious and angry about the situation and told the man to be a responsible blacksmith. Shaking with anger, the arms dealer told the man to shut up and blamed him for everything, then grabbed one of the swords and warned him not to act. The man ran straight at the main character and told him to stop preaching. The main character told the people around him to step aside and cursed silently. When the arms dealer approached Tourette, a girl stepped in front of him and told him to stop what he was doing. Then the stranger knocked the sword from his hands. The main character and the unhappy customers were stunned by her actions. Unconscious, the arms dealer lay on the ground. The girl told the guards to take him away, and they agreed. The whole crowd lit up, smiles spreading across their faces as someone raised their hands in a joyful gesture. People began saying she was the soldiers' commander. They thanked her loudly, while the main character watched in shock. He looked at her and thanked her, saying she had saved him. The girl said it was her job, and then she noticed something. Watching him closely, she began to feel a little nervous. When she tried to ask him something, she stammered, and Dorrit himself grew uneasy under the attention. He briefly wondered if he looked unemployed or like a suspicious old man about to be arrested. Then he heard the end of the question asking if he was a teacher. A bright smile spread across her face. Her cheeks flushed as she said her name was Militer and asked if he remembered her. The commander said that 10 years earlier, the main character had made her a toy sword, and she immediately remembered the little girl with a ponytail. After that, Dorrit looked at her more closely, smiled, and said she had grown so much and hadn't expected to meet her here, and she replied happily that it was indeed him. The girl asked him whether he had received her letter. Her subordinates then asked who the man was. Militaire said the protagonist had cared for her when she was very young, so she would chat with him for a bit. After that, the girl told her subordinates to go back first, and they agreed, while Dorrit, shocked, asked if she had really become a commander, and she said it was thanks to him. The protagonist called it an amazing achievement, but the girl said it wasn't, and that it was all thanks to her sword. Dorrit asked her to explain what she meant by that. Militer asked him to look at him. She slowly began to understand him. The man's face looked very tense. Picking up the sword, the protagonist saw it was pitch black. It was the divine magic sword Shinma, rank S, with the holy element. Surprised, he called it the country's treasure, and a military officer replied that he had created it. Direct couldn't remember a sword like that and blamed age-related dementia, so the girl said he should let her rephrase her sentence. Military said seriously that the toy sword he'd made for her had evolved. Shocked, the main character asked her about it again. He said he had never heard of such a thing, and she said this was her first time encountering it too. Militer said it changed shape as she grew and eventually became like this, starting as a small dagger in childhood and changing into its current form when she was older and more aware. Then the girl told him the weapon he had made could probably evolve. He stared at the sword in shock. Dorrit studied it closely, unsure whether the sword was really a toy from that period, and trying to match his memories to what he saw. After that, the main character asked again whether it had really been a toy and said he could hardly believe it. Militaire described it as the maturation of feelings. Dorrit looked at her with a questioning expression. Militaire explained that this was her hypothesis. Looking at him, the girl asked if anyone had seen anything similar written when he made tools. The protagonist replied that there were no more adventurers there, said people often change things in writing, and thought that as a blacksmith he could not open a shop there. He said out loud that his creations were discarded faster than they were opened. The girl interrupted, agreed it was true, and said she had called him for a specific purpose. Military met his gaze with resolve, her eyes sparkling and cheeks flushed, and told him she had a favor to ask. The main character said she had written about it in a letter, then he asked what she needed. The girl took his hand and said everything was simple. She asked him if he could become the personal blacksmith of their valiant army, as much as possible for him. The main character immediately flew away from her and refused, saying it was too much for him, and the girl bowed and admitted she had asked too much. The military began approaching him again. She said they had no one else to ask. Dorrit was shocked. He stuttered and asked why they had chosen him. The girl said there were reasons for it. He immediately asked her again what those reasons were. At that moment, the woman he had helped earlier stepped into the conversation. Smiling, she thanked him for his help and said she didn't even know how to thank him. The girl beside her turned to Militaire, thanked her and called her commander, and Militaire did not look pleased. The girl approached her and said she had seen her at the entrance ceremony and was glad no one was hurt. Soldiers seized the protagonist's hand and told him they had to hurry. Shocked, he fell silent, then abruptly asked where they were going. Meanwhile, the woman and the girl kept shouting that they wanted to thank him, so they suggested he look into a hotel in the Eastern District. Convinced he was making useful connections, the protagonist waved and smiled and said he would stop by, but Melita interrupted him and said he hadn't said anything, otherwise he would bite his tongue. At that moment inside the Blacksmith Guild, Sinan styled his hair and then checked his appearance carefully. Closing his eyes and striking a pose, he felt dazzling, then smiled and winked. Then he went to the workers, greeted them, and asked if they were ready to earn money. His subordinates greeted him back. Smiling, the man said the morning meeting would now begin, starting with the guild's philosophy. A stranger interrupted him and asked for forgiveness. Sinan turned to them and asked who they were. A dark-haired man stood there with several guards behind him. A man stepped up to the guildmaster and asked if the main character was here, looking very serious. No one answered him, so he repeated his question about whether Dorrit was here, and said he was a messenger from the royal palace named Senji. The other man said he was looking for the famous blacksmith because Dorette had a request for him, and Sinon grew very angry and asked if he really had a request for that man. Claiming to be the guildmaster here, the man asked if I had any requests for Mr. Sinon. I replied no. He grew even angrier. After that, Sinon said the main character was gone and that he had fired the useless person. Senji was shocked and asked him again if he really had fired him. The man explained that Torret was only draining the guild's resources and that he did not respect him at all. Sinon said smugly that he got what he deserved. Senji began to fall back and asked whether Mr. Darrett really wasn't there. His condition grew worse, and he kept saying the blacksmith the queen herself valued had been fired. Senji said everything had gone badly, and the soldiers asked what to do with it. Sinon suggested they just give it to him, and the man said they were told to give it specifically to the main character. Furious, Sinon approached the soldier, grabbed the box, and demanded to know what was inside, and the soldier immediately asked what he was doing, to which Sinon replied that he was the guildmaster here. Angrily, the other man said he had far more experience than the main character. He then opened the box and was surprised. Initially, Amatsurugi's sword was S-rank, carried the saint element, and seemed to glow. Sinon began to tremble and said it was so beautiful that it truly looked like the sword of a real angel. Senji said they had to take it to Mr. Darrett for repairs, and the man asked why he had to hand over the treasure. Sinon thought again about the claim that the protagonist created the sword, his face a mix of anger and shock. Grabbing Senji by the collar, he yelled that this was clearly not a funny joke. Sinon said the man simply couldn't have created it. The guard then said to let Mr. Senji go. Mr. Senji said the sword really wasn't in that form. Senji said the Amatsurugi was an evolved sword. The room fell silent at once. Sinon was shocked and asked whether the sword had really evolved, then said they had really thought he was a stupid person. Senji looked at him and said it was true. The queen had immediately ordered that they find him, and he was serious with no hint of a joke. Sinon screamed again that he couldn't stand it, then walked up to the sword and said he'd fix it now. Senji immediately held up his hand and told the man to stop because the man was not being direct. The man replied that as guildmaster, he was the best blacksmith here. Then he looked at the others, said smugly that he was the boss here, asked them to wait, and Senji thought that was logical. He kicked everyone out of the room, went back to the sword, inspected the blade for damage, and said he could sharpen it with a wet stone. He has never sharpened a sword in his life, but after watching his workers, he can handle it. Sharp observation lets him master everything expertly. He acted immediately, but something apparently went wrong, and a loud scream from the house even scared the birds flying by. Senji called his name at once, asked about the loud noise and whether he was okay, and Sinon replied that he was still working so they should remain silent. Things went wrong. When the man took direct action, the sword split in two. Sinon realized this was terrible. Breaking the country's treasure was a serious crime that could mean execution by hanging, drowning, or beheading. He collapsed in fear and hit his head. The man considered his options. He felt very tense. He could not think of a solution. Pausing, he decided to calm down, think clearly, and find a solution. So he immediately used the breathing technique he had developed, and suddenly, a solution came to him. Figuring it was broken, Sinon decided to fasten it back together and began searching the boxes for anything that could help. Hidden among many objects in one box, he found the item he was looking for, temporary glue. Sinon came out and thanked everyone for waiting, and Senji said he had handled it quickly, making it immediately clear he was the guildmaster. The boy reached out and asked to test it, but the man cut him off, called him an amateur, and said the sword could not be used for some time. Senji tried to argue with him, but Senna asked whether he really meant to say he doubted him. The guy tried to explain that it was not the reason, but he interrupted him again. Senji looked at the sword from a distance and said he could still see roughness on the blade. Seinen called that a lie, said Senji had no evidence, and argued it only needed to be folded back. The man walked over to the box and planned to leave it there. If they noticed it later, he could blame them. As he slid the sword in, it struck the side of the box. Under sudden pressure, the sword snapped. The broken piece flew off and hit the floor, and Sinon was horrified while Senji and the guards looked on in shock. He realized he was in trouble now. The guards were angry, the Sinons and subordinates were terrified, and Senji didn't understand what had happened. The man began to shake, called the guildmaster by name, and asked whether he was supposed to fix it. The guildmaster started mumbling something unintelligible. Fear gripped him. Glancing over his shoulder, he watched his subordinates. His subordinates were unhappy with their boss's actions. Then he scratched his chin, looked up at the ceiling, and said it was strange. Absolutely sure he'd fixed it. he added that maybe he'd confused it with another one. Senji suddenly lunged at him, grabbed his collar, and demanded to know what he'd done, calling him stupid. It was clear he was furious. Squatting down, the guy said the man had broken him, and he knew he could not be relied on. Sit-on immediately started shouting that it was rude. It turned out Senji even shed a tear, but he answered the guild master's final words by pointing at him and saying he was under arrest. Drinking tea with Militar, the girl heard he had been fired from the guild. She was shocked and could not believe they had fired such a famous blacksmith. His boss was as dumb as a cork. Militari was clearly furious. Grasping a fork, she drove it into the cake with deliberate cruelty and called it the height of incompetence. Sinan sat in the carriage between two guards with his hands cuffed, thinking about how it had come to this. Concluding that it was all the main character's fault, he decided he would definitely take revenge. At the Gross Army base, Militar approached Dorette and said that she had asked him to forgive her and to be their personal blacksmith. The main character replied that there was nothing wrong with that and asked what he should do next, and the girl said everything was fine and suggested he look in front of her. The military took charge of the building and claimed it as their forge. Dorette said it was obvious at once it belonged to the military because it was so large. After that, they went in together. The girl faced the group and asked them to forgive her. That drew their attention. They noticed the two of them and then greeted their commander. The boys immediately stood at attention, put their hands to their foreheads, and said they were greeting her. The military told them they could relax. They obeyed her and then asked about the men beside her. Smiling and blushing, the girl said he was the one who made her sword and that his name was Mr. Darrett. All the boys stared at them in shock. They clearly did not believe her because the sword performer simply looked different to them. Scratching the back of his head, the main character stammered that he was glad to meet you and that his name was Darrett. The boys started saying they'd just met a legendary blacksmith, called him an old man, and said he didn't look like the maker of the famed sword, so they figured the commander was deceiving everyone. Listening to them, he still could not believe he had made such a sword, and he noticed again that they called him an old man. At that point, Militara asked where Nana Hikari was, and the boys hesitated before saying he had finished some work and left. Exhaling heavily, the girl asked whether he had really done it again, and the others replied they'd told him, but he hadn't even listened. Turning to the commander, the protagonist asked if she meant the local blacksmith, but the commander cut him off and said yes. She said their current blacksmith is Nana Hikari. Nana's family has made major donations. He is Duke Felgron's only son. Given his unpleasant nature, he was no good as a blacksmith. For now, they could only keep his constant discontent in check. Neither she nor her subordinates liked that very much. He thought people like that were everywhere inside. The girl was about to say he was on a whole different level when the door opened. Nana Hikari stood there with a sparkling aura, smiling as he said it was as dirty here as always. Militara called him by name immediately. The protagonist turned, looked at him, and realized he looked exactly like his former boss. The girl asked the blacksmith where he'd been, and the man said he'd been on a date. Then the brunette asked about the longsword, and Nana Hikari picked it up and asked if that was the one he meant. Then the man threw the sword into the brunette's hands and told him to hold it, and the brunette flinched at his words. He missed it. His behavior was indirect, darting in different directions. The other man wondered if he was serious. Now the big shot made no effort to hide his terrible character. Smiling, Nana Hikari asked what they thought of the sword and whether he had done everything perfectly. The brunette stuttered a thank you, and he sighed heavily. The protagonist looked at the sword and thought it was in terrible shape, as if no one had touched it. Glancing at Militaru, he meant to ask her about it too. At that moment, a man noticed him and began to stand. Nana Hikari said he had fixed it, then rushed up to the brunette, grabbed his collar, and asked if there was something he didn't like. Suddenly, the main character ran forward and stopped the blacksmith's fist as it swung toward the brunette, taking the blacksmith by surprise. Durant gave Nana Hikari a serious, authoritative look and said that if he was a blacksmith, he should fix his work, and Nana Hikari asked what he wanted, calling him an old man. Soldiers immediately approached them, told the man to calm down, and she explained that he created her legendary sword and was a blacksmith from Written. Nana Hikari turned his gaze to the protagonist, stunned, and asked her again whether it was true. She began telling the man he was already a first-class blacksmith and that they would now have a second master with them, but she did not finish speaking. Nana Hikari pulled his hand away from Dorrit's and told him firmly to show what he could do. Dorrit asked Nana Hikari again if Nana Hikari really meant him. Standing before them, the boy planted his feet wide and crossed his arms over his chest. Smiling, he proposed a duel between blacksmiths. No one objected when he said they would fight with swords they had made themselves. Whoever's sword broke lost, and the main character said he understood. The man smiled and said there would be 2 conditions, holding up his hand to show them. Pointing to the materials, Nanny Hikari said the first condition was that they could be used only to make weapons. The second condition is that one of this forge's workers must use his sword. He pointed at the crowd. He pointed at the newcomer, Kanvai, and she froze, her mouth falling open in surprise. The protagonist froze in shock and asked again if he really should be there and how long she had been there. Since she was so small, he had not even noticed her. Direct froze at first, but he pulled himself together, said everything was fine, and he agreed. Militaire was stunned by his words and immediately called out to him. No one paid attention to her words. Nana Hikari smiled and said everything was decided. The main character did not even raise an eyebrow and stared straight at his rival. The girl grew angry at that moment. The man said the duel would be in 5 days and that the loser would have to return to his village, and the main character said that if he won he would take his work seriously. Nana Hikari exhaled and asked how he saw himself. The forge is his after all. Then he left the room, slamming the door loudly. Militaire immediately bowed to Duret and asked his forgiveness, saying she had only made the situation worse, but Duret told her she was not to blame. At that moment, Kanfi ran up to them. Tears filled the girl's eyes as she asked what to do because she could only care for the sword. Smiling, the main character said it was fine and that he would make her a sword so she would never lose, and Militaria was shocked by his words. He added they would use improvised materials to make quality weapons, saying not every blacksmith can do that, and asking them to trust him as he winked. After a while, the protagonist began making weapons. He started by heating the furnace, then checked the room and found only D-rank materials. Pulling on his gloves, he said it was time to begin, as Militari entered the room and called to him. Having not seen him work for a long time, she asked to watch. He said she could only do it from afar, and she agreed happily. Military eased into a chair by the table and sat so quietly she made no sound as the protagonist was melting metal in the furnace. Believing he already had a plan, he first started hammering the hot metal, then closed his eyes to see the full picture. His eyes opened wide, and the material in his tools began to glow brightly, lighting up the whole room. Militaire looked at it and thought it sounded good. Only a few weeks had passed since he last held a hammer, but that still felt like a long time. A blacksmith's blood runs hot inside him. It's beyond his control. He loves blacksmithing. The main character had a broad, happy smile. The protagonist thought about making a sword sharper to give Kanfi a better one and using the magic thunderstone to improve its edge. Sitting on the ground in the lotus position, the man folded his hands over the material and felt sure he could do it. At that moment, Military sprang to her feet and called to him, and when Darrett asked what she wanted, she asked if he was finished yet. The main character replied that after 30 years as a blacksmith he works faster, but there are some nuances. After a few moments, the sword finished forming and proved to be S rank, so Duret regarded it as a true treasure and thought its rank was even higher than he had expected. Militare lowered her head and said he had clearly gone too far. The man scratched the back of his head and laughed sheepishly. Dawn arrived, the sun shone, many people gathered near the forge, and the girl addressed everyone. Smiling, Militade said the protagonist's sword was ready. The protagonist then turned to Kanfi and told her to come to them. The crowds began talking among themselves, saying you could tell the master was right because he did it so quickly, and then they grew curious about what kind of sword it was. Could a fit walk up to Dorit and Militai, stand at attention, raise her hands to her head, address them by name, and say that the sword was really ready? She said she was right, and he wanted to give it to her immediately. The man held the sword out to her. Holding it in his hand, the protagonist said it was his sword, but he clearly found that hard to believe. The man said he named it Kamina. It is the Thunder Emperor Kamina's sword. It has the rank of S and its element is holy. Duret handed it to the girl and said it is sharp. She needs to be careful. The crowd was shocked. Kanafi held it in hands that seemed to glow, a blush appearing on her cheeks as she smiled, and said the sword was very beautiful. Military said the protagonist had given his all, so she must not let him down or let his feelings go to waste, and Kanfi saluted at once and said she had taken everything into account. After that, she offered to train the girl herself before the battle, and the crowd hummed with pleasure, saying that under the commander's guidance she would surely become stronger. The military officer turned to Kanfi with a smile and said she should be on the training field tomorrow, standing like a bayonet. Kanfi felt intimidated by the pressure and agreed at once while Duret silently wished him luck. At the Nana Hikari estate, the latter was outraged and demanded to know how the main character dared to do that. Furious, the man held out his hand to the servant and told her to look. The hand turned red, and he vowed never to forgive him. Calling her by name, he got no reaction. That made her seem very capable but creepy. He said out loud that he needed to record the beatings and sue him. The girl said he would not do it, and Nana Hikari asked her why she thought that. The maid bandaged him, then said his hand was fine and tied a bow for him. Nanakari was clearly unhappy with the situation. He snarled and bared his teeth. The girl ignored him, turned her head to the side, and asked if these were really materials for a sword. Smirking, the man said these were S-rank materials, then pulled the best pieces from his storage, including full metal, earth dragon scale, thunder godstone, platinum steel, and eternal flame stone. He said this would let him make the best sword the blacksmith had ever seen. The girl said she understood everything. Nana Hikari clenched his fist and told Durit to watch because he would take revenge on him. Training day arrived. Militar said it was impossible to make and fit a ballmaster in 5 days, and they still didn't know who her opponent would be. The girl listened to Militar attentively. The commander continued, saying the most important thing is that the sword must not break and that she knows how to prevent it. Konfi said firmly she understood she only needed to parry the enemy's attacks, and Militara praised her, then told her to get ready. Confident her body would remember everything, she suddenly rushed into the attack, clearly determined. Konfi was stunned that they barely covered the theory and jumped straight into practice, and the main character shared the same shock at what was happening. At that moment, Militari suddenly attacked, and the girl, cold and composed, raised her sword to block the blow. During this, the girl instructed her not to step to the side but to block with the blade. She said she understood everything. After the military said they would fight again, she agreed and thought about how to repel blade attacks. When the commander struck, Konfi succeeded, and she was very happy about it. Too distracted to notice at first, she realized the commander was no longer in front of her and immediately called out to her. It turned out the girl came up behind her, slapped her on the shoulder, and said she had lost, and the other woman told her not to let her guard down in a fight, so the girl apologized and said they would do it again. Watching the battles, the main character thought the girl had treated her student harshly from day one. Later that night, Konfi collapsed onto her back with her arms spread wide, bruised and covered in dirt, yet she thanked the commander with all her heart. Military looked at her and said they would train with Kamina tomorrow, and the girl agreed. Smiling sweetly, the girl turned to the main character and told him to ready his sword for the fight, and the man, surprised, stuttered and agreed. Night had fallen outside, and a large moon shone overhead as everyone at the forge sat in the dining room eating dinner. The brunette ate aggressively, concentrating and quickly, while the man beside her shoved food from a cup into his mouth, and someone else chatted calmly with colleagues. The brunette said the commander's training was still as tough, and Konfi, embarrassed, asked if they had really seen everything. The other brunette agreed, and they slipped into the shadows. They told him that conflict was truly amazing. For her size, she was doing well. The words embarrassed the girl. She asked if they really thought so. Konfi disliked that they mentioned the size and made an unnecessary comment. One of the brunettes laughed at her, and the blonde sitting next to her asked the girl if it was time for him to go. Then Konfi picked up her tray of dishes and said she would leave. The guys agreed, and the blonde handed the brunette a towel. As his colleagues called Konfi's name, she turned and a towel hit her forehead, causing her to blush with embarrassment. The boys said that the smiles on their faces told her not to catch a cold. They smiled warmly and showed their support with gentle gestures. The girl bowed to them. Night had fallen outside the window and nothing could be seen. Standing by a column, the protagonist watched Konfi train with a sword and practice her strikes. Her progress was clear. She landed blow after blow with relentless force, showed no sign of fatigue, and the man admired her. After a while, Konfi paused, exhaled, and wiped her face with a towel as the protagonist called out to tell her she had done a good job. He turned toward the voice. She blushed and asked if it was really Mr. Darrett, and he smiled and asked if she was really training so late. Konfi said she does this every day and wants to try to catch up with the commander at least a little. Smiling broadly, the girl pictured Militaru standing before her and said her dream was to be just like her. The main character said he understood everything. One girl was pushing the other around a lot, so he got worried and went to see her. Her broad smile showed the man he was kind. He scratched his head, said it was only concern, then asked if she really opposed it, and she said no. Konfi said the main character made her such a beautiful sword, so she can't let it break. The girl pictured this work of art before her and said it was simply a beautiful sword. Its sound, like light peals of thunder, awakened something in her she had not known before. It was clear she simply loved this sword. The protagonist froze for a second when the girl called his name. He said he had disturbed her and would leave, forced a smile, turned, waved, and she wished him good night. Seeing Kanfei's inspired face, Dorrit could hardly believe she liked the sword he made so much and wondered when his work had last made someone that happy. Clearly pleased, the main character smiled, turned, and said everything was decided. Walking down the road, the man was thinking about how he would have to work with Kamina while humming a cheerful song. 4 days after the rivalry was announced, Nanakari was angry and dissatisfied and called out to Gilmas. The boy asked him why his sword was rank A yet had no element. The sword was solid and hard. The servant trembled under that pressure. Gilmas looked very worried and stammered as he explained how hard it was to process S-rank materials. Nanahikari said angrily he did not want to know, then waved his hand aside and told the man to go away, and the man mumbled something about payment. Holding a sword before him, the heir of the house asked whether the man really intended to pay with his life. Frightened, Gil ran away from home. Nana Hakari turned to his servant agent and told her to call someone to him, and the girl said she understood. Some time later, the mercenary Detroit approached, turned to Hikari, and asked what he should really call him while also addressing him as Lord. A man sat at the table drinking coffee and told Detroit the whole situation with Dorrit, saying he had failed to make an S-rank sword, and Detroit replied that the rank did not matter. Then the man claimed he could defeat anyone with any sword and crushed a large piece of metal with his bare hands right before our eyes. Nana Hakari studied the folded metal carefully. Detroit stayed calm, pleased with the skills he had shown. The boy immediately felt certain he could not lose. The house's heir grinned, thinking this was too easy for him, but it would be better this way. After that, Nana Hikari called the maid by name and told her not to tell her parents about this, and the girl agreed, though it was clear she did not like it. On the day of the competition, Nana Hikari turned to the protagonist and greeted him, and the protagonist said they hadn't seen each other for 5 days and praised Nana Hikari for not running away. At that moment, all the employees of the forge, along with Militar and Dread, looked ahead in shock. They realized Nana Hikari had put Detroit up as a rival to Confi, and it was once again announced as a duel of blacksmiths. People immediately recognized the man on the opponent's side and began to wonder if he was really the Detroit destroyer and if he had actually sent him into battle. People immediately shouted for everyone to look at the scene of the conflict, while the girl stood resolutely, holding it in her hand as real lightning came from it. Militaro was furious, shouting that the fight was unfair and even clenching her fists while the protagonist silently agreed. At that moment, Nana Hikari examined the sword the protagonist had made and said it was clearly a fake. The men began discussing the rules. They said there were only 2 conditions: if your sword breaks you lose, and if you leave the arena you lose. The girl complained that the rules were unfair. Detroit looked at Confi and asked whether this little girl was his opponent. The girl said nothing and showed no fear. The judge then drew their attention. Raising his hand, he called for the fight to begin. The man immediately lifted his sword and attacked Confi. As a mercenary, he was skilled in combat. The man slammed the ground so hard that dust and dirt flew everywhere, and Confi had to step back a little because there was too much dust. Spectators were shocked by what was happening, shouted that it was a huge force, and were almost blown away. Detroit didn't wait for things to settle and immediately attacked the girl, telling her she would get what she deserved and couldn't run forever. He struck again, sending the conflict flying. She leapt high and landed a fair distance from her enemy. It turned out she had fallen into some kind of trap, and as they moved toward a corner, Detroit laughed and the people said the conflict had nowhere left to run. Spectators and workers at the forge watched in shock, and someone there said they could not watch any longer. He tried to turn to Confi and ask her to give herself up to him. The girl said firmly, a little angrily, that she would not. The man said he had warned her. The destroyer then said the girl would definitely regret her decision now and strained his arms to show his power. Confi felt a little nervous because the enemy was clearly dangerous, and she remembered the commander training him hard and Mr. Durrett creating Kamina for her. Detroit swung his huge sword and told Confi not to die, and she replied firmly that she would not lose. She unleashed her sword's full power, and lightning bolts erupted across the field and surrounding area, shocking the protagonist, Militaire, and Nana Hikari. Thanks to that power, Confi cut off Detroit's sword, its blade flying to the side, and his colleagues stared in shock as they debated whether the destroyer's sword had really fallen apart. The protagonist watched closely, his expression turning uncertain because he thought he had gone too far with the sword. The judge immediately looked at the scene and said the conflict had won the battle, leaving everyone around in shock. Militara smiled at the main character, called him teacher, and said they had succeeded. He agreed. After that, Confi ran up to them, beaming, calling the girl commander. Confi heard her reply that she was a good girl, At that moment, Detroit staggered toward Nana Hikari, clearly in shock. Durrett approached him with a smile and said that, as promised, he should take his work more seriously from that day on, and the man told him to shut up and stop talking to him. After that, Nana Hikari pointed at him and said he was leaving this damn army and would sue them if they all died here. The maid glared at him. She gave him a light tap on the back to shut him up, and he clearly didn't expect that from her. Derek, Confi, and Militaire stood shocked. The maid apologized to them for her young master and said she would scold him and try to bring him to his senses. The protagonist, the commander, and Confi watched the maid walk away from the battlefield with Nana Hikari and Detruse. Later, at the man's house, the mood made it clear he saw Derek as a bad person and would never forgive him, and he then turned to the destroyer and asked what he had been paid for. When Detroit said he was retiring, the man was shocked. Then he said he had lost to a little girl and felt too weak. After that, she went into the corridor and walked away, saying he would live in peace, and he said goodbye to them. Tension filled the house. He called the destroyer utterly useless and a bad person. Then he turned to the maid and said it was her turn, calling her a damn traitor. Nana Hikari shouted that the girl had dared to raise her hand against her master and should apologize. She said indifferently that she would admit she had hit him, and the man, without turning his head toward her, told her to do so. The maid had already stepped aside when she said he used S-rank materials and that the destroyer lived in the mansion. After saying she had told his parents everything, the girl said goodbye and walked away, leaving Nana Hikari shocked by her final words. Running into the corridor after her, he called her by name, reminded her she had promised not to tell them anything, and then said he would fire her. At that moment, someone called his name. His parents were there, furious, and sending out strong waves of aggression, and the man clutched the paper in his hand while Hikari called them immediately. The father asked whether he was using materials they had prepared for sale to another country without permission, and the mother asked whether he was trying to destroy the family's reputation. They loudly asked him if he understood what he was doing. Non-Hikari tried to justify himself, but they did not listen. Father said he'd had enough. Flatly, the man told his son that the family was disowning him, and the boy was stunned. The head of the family then told his servants to take him to the Taman forest. Nana Hikari reached out and asked them to wait and not do it. The parents turned their backs and walked away. Nana Hikari reached out to his parents as they left, trying to stop them, and kept calling, but they didn't respond. After some time in Taman forest, the man pushed through tangled thickets as strange noises came from all around, making him tremble with fear. Nana Hikari asked into the void what they wanted from him. His talk was about them all leaving. Small abrasions had already appeared on his face. He thought he was now surrounded by monsters and abandoned in the forest. All of this happens because the main character grew jealous of him and challenged him to a duel. Nathakiri stopped in his tracks, lowered his head, and wondered why he hadn't been more honest in that situation. Near the army forge, Militaire told Confi the duel was at a decent level and that she fought like an experienced soldier. The girl saluted the commander and thanked her, then said she had won because of her and deserved it, and the commander smiled and said he had simply made the sword. The protagonist credited the girl with the main contribution. The girl smiled sweetly at those words. At that moment, someone called her name. Confi ran straight to her comrades, thanked Dorette and Militaire again, and when she reached the guys, they began shouting congratulations and calling her a good girl. Militaire looked at her and said this day marked the start of her brilliant career, and she agreed. After that, the girl announced to everyone that starting today, Dorette would be the army's new blacksmith. Everyone cheered and chanted that he was an old man. He wished they would stop calling him that. Meanwhile, in the kingdom of Grossa, the palace was large and had several towers. Senji walked down a dark corridor and heard someone shouting to be let out. Several people were standing in front of us cell. It was Sinon. Sinon was furious and shouted that they were holding him here like a monkey. They definitely will not get away with it. The man spoke angrily about them, ignoring his complaints, and called them bad people, and one guard asked what he meant and another told him to sit quietly. A sudden ache forced Senji to pause, his head hurting from the noise. Then after a moment he stepped closer to thank the guards for their efforts, and they saluted him immediately. After that, Senji opened the cell bars and told Sinon to come out, and Sinon was surprised while Senji was unhappy to have to do it. A new day dawned. A huge queue had formed near the army forge. People arriving asked in shock whether there really was a queue again. Some even started arguing among themselves. In the forge, several men said Duret's repairs made it easier for one of them to wield his sword. Another asked to have his sword adjusted, and a third asked to have his shoulder pads adjusted. The main character, holding a hammer, turns to them and asks them to wait a moment. Everything happens on cue. Several people stood inside the forge, watching Dorrit handle the weapon. They glanced to the side and saw a sword inside the box. The box had a glass door, so the sword was visible. People began saying the sword was very beautiful. One man said he would become the owner of Kamina. Another argued it would not happen and said he would beat him, and a third came over and said he would not lose either. Comfy put her hand to her chest and said she would become the true owner of Kamina. The brunette asked if it really said an S-rank feat was required, and the girl confirmed it, saying a commander, for example, would have to defeat one of the 4 demon kings. At that moment the protagonist heard those words, and stunned, realized a stiff militaire had truly defeated the demon king. Confi agreed the commander was amazing, and said she needed to become stronger too, while Darrett said militaire was a true hero. Smiling, the main character was glad the sword he had made was being used for feats, and he looked at the hammer, satisfied that everything was clean and in order. By now the visitors to the forge were happily talking about what Dorrit had done to Kamina, and he seemed amazing, so they wanted to be that cool old man, but Ladder hurt all their words. Then he suddenly rose from his seat and said he was finished for the day. The guy stood there stunned. Outside, he told them to come to him tomorrow. A female service member approached him, smiling, to say he had done a great job after a very busy day. The main character agreed, saying there was more work than in the written version, and he was pleased when the girl laughed and said she was glad to hear that. The military said Dorrit has changed the soldiers. They all want to use Kamina, so they have decided to take their training seriously. Smiling, the protagonist said it was the highest praise a blacksmith could receive, and then thanked her. The girl bowed her head and apologized, saying she was very sorry that Her Majesty had limited him, and when asked if she meant that equipment and repairs should be kept to a minimum, she answered yes. The main character then said it was no problem, that he understood everything, and that a weapon like Kamina could not be everywhere or with everyone. Militer smiled warmly, a blush coloring her cheeks. She said she had also come to him to discuss something important. He asked about it immediately. Saying that Her Majesty wanted to meet him, the girl asked permission to go to the palace. Stunned, the protagonist asked if this really had to be done now, and she answered yes. He then asked why it had to be done, and it was obvious he was very tense. Militer explained that his contribution raised the soldiers' overall motivation, a great achievement. The main character wondered whether the queen really wanted to see a common man and what he should do in that situation. At that moment, the girl called to him. Stuttering, the man turned to the soldier and asked what a queen was, and the girl hesitated for a moment before saying she would explain it in a few words. The commander remembered all their meetings and said she was very strict. Meanwhile, in the castle, Queen Renade of the Kingdom of Glossace sat on the throne and declared that Amatsurugi was broken. Senji knelt and said Sinon had deceived him, but he could not see his own incompetence and still agreed to take responsibility, while Sinon sat thinking the queen was beautiful. Rising from her throne, the girl walked toward them and told Senji he had made a mistake. He bowed his head before her, closed his eyes, and said it was true, so he was ready to accept the punishment. The queen drew her whip, said angrily that he knew perfectly well she did not like incompetent people, then struck him across the body, and his face went red as he groaned. She said she would hit him even harder, and he replied with pleasure in his voice. Sign-on looked at this in shock and asked what was going on. After a while, the queen finished punishing Senji. Senji lay on the floor, very happy. The girl walked up to Senon and said it was his turn now. With her whip, she accused him of being a bad person, the guildmaster who broke their country's treasure. The queen told him to think about his incompetence, and when the man screamed about the pain to get through to her, she angrily said he would no longer be guildmaster. Sometime later, the main character, a soldier, reached the queen's castle. A girl turned to him and called his name. He agreed. They stopped before the tall painted doors. Militer asked the man if he was ready. The man froze at her question. The main character said he would need at least a year to be ready, his heart about to jump out, and the girl said it was a good joke. The guards started opening the door for them. Militare told the man everything would be fine. Her Majesty is kind to competent people. At that moment they entered, came forward and knelt before the queen, who said they were very kind to come and that she was glad to see them, and Militura thanked her and said she had brought Dareth. The main character admitted it was him, and the queen smiled warmly, calling him the wonderful blacksmith who created Kamina and Shinma. Raising her hand, she pointed at the man and said she recognized him as the country's best blacksmith. The protagonist put a hand to his heart, closed his eyes, bowed to her and thanked her, calling it an honor, and his face went red. The queen told him he had to deal with Nana Hikari himself, explained she had other things to do and could not interfere, and apologized to him. She admitted her gaze seemed clouded. The protagonist immediately raised his head and said her eyes were not clouded and were beautiful like precious stones. Laughing, the queen said he was not only a good blacksmith, but also a thief of women's hearts, and Darrett felt embarrassed by her words. Her Highness said she called the protagonist today about a very important matter and reported that Amatsurugi was broken. The man pressed her again about the sword, and the queen asked if he had truly forgotten. A glass display case was placed in front of him. Her Highness said the sword was an Amatsurugi, and the protagonist apologized to her. He had never seen a sword so beautiful. The queen said a nobleman admired it every day, and one day the sword transformed. In the end, he decided to donate it to the state. The protagonist considered another evolution to S rank, and how to repair the sword he could not remember. After that, his eyes suddenly widened in shock, as he remembered his military students, warning that the queen was very strict. Darrett apologized politely and said he could not remember anything at all. The queen was surprised and said he should not forget what he had done with his own hands, since such things are not easily forgotten. She smiled, saying he was a very interesting man and that his behavior intrigued her. Though a bit reserved, he still held her interest. Darrett felt puzzled and thought it odd that an aristocrat would constantly admire a sword, since he found it strange that people of high birth would simply admire weapons. The queen said she wanted to have Matsurugi repaired, the sword that had recently broken, and that the repair was very important to her, making it one of her top priorities. The man was surprised by the statement. He had expected anything but a request to fix the sword. He inspected the sword and realized a closer look showed something was wrong with it. The girl said there was something else. Another middle-aged man was shoved into the room, fell hard onto the cold floor, and was treated like a criminal who had committed a very serious crime. The couple looked at him, clearly shocked that he had shown up at all, and even more surprised to see him in such a state. The man lay on the ground, unable to get up, as if someone had thrown him with great force to leave him unconscious. The queen said he was the same idiot who broke the sword and had a request for Darrett, and her voice made it clear the request could be serious. She asked the blacksmith if he would take her on as an apprentice, and although her motives were unclear, she spoke earnestly. Gathering his strength, the man on the ground frowned, as if he had a second wind and was angry at every word the queen spoke. Trying to defend himself, he said he couldn't learn anything from such trash, but the queen replied that he was the only trash here and that he alone was to blame for everything. They kept arguing and paid no attention to anyone, too absorbed in their own dispute. Darrett realized the whole situation was now completely dark and that it was probably worth addressing. She arranged for a subordinate to look after them and named him Senji, a nice guy with the same charming looks. A boy with a bright smile walked into the room and said he would not let Sinan cause any trouble. His voice sounded confident, as if he were 10 times stronger than he looked at first glance. Darrett folded his arms across his chest, knowing he could not refuse the queen and had no choice, because refusing her could cost him his head or worse. Smiling sharply, he said he would do whatever the queen wanted, and he couldn't refuse, so all he could do was accept because at the moment he had no other choice. The girl replied that she looked forward to the man's success and spoke sincerely as she escorted her guest outside the throne room. The crowd left the royal chambers, and the heavy door slammed shut behind them, making it clear they were no longer in the queen's sight. Darrett sighed and raised his hands sharply to stretch his back. It dawned on him that he'd been worrying for nothing. At last he could relax. He stretched his neck and suggested they return to the hotel. All he could think about now was getting a good rest after such an adventure. She asked where he was staying, and he said he was at a hotel in the Eastern District, a good place to stop and rest. Senji suggested he stay at the National Guard dormitory, but Darrett was embarrassed and said it wasn't worth it because he would be embarrassed to be there. He reassured them that he was staying at a very good hotel, so there was no need to worry about him. The man offered to see them off. He couldn't leave his guests without proper attention. Darrett pointed to the place where he stopped, a small 2-story house with many rooms inside. It looked cozy. As he came in, he told Dell he was back and glad to have some time to rest. Smiling, she greeted the man and said she had begun to worry because he had been gone so long, which had made her anxious. Melitario bristled and announced loudly that she would live here too, which surprised the couple because they had not expected her to react so sharply. The girl smiled wickedly and said she would start living here today. Her firm voice and straight posture showed she wasn't going to let Derek go easily. Dell nodded awkwardly and said she would prepare the room very soon, a little unnerved by the girl's anger, since people rarely stared at her as if they wanted to burn her. Turning sharply, she changed direction because she urgently needed to know something. She asked whether to prepare a bath or dinner first. The man replied that if Militari were here, dinner would come first because he cared for his companion as if she were his daughter. The girls in Sinan disliked this and became very angry, but each had their own reasons. The man shouted that only Darrett was being spoiled, said he was staying here too, openly jealous and wanting the same attention from the sweet girl for himself. Sanji kicked him, saying no one would let him stop here, and was too angry to let him continue like that. Del announced there were no rooms left, only stables. Sinan wanted to stay but had to leave. Taken aback by that impudence, Sinan offered him the stables. Senji grabbed him by the ear and tried to drag him away, already getting angry. The man did not like this. One reminded her he was the guild master, the other said he was already a former master, so it no longer mattered. Del asked the couple to wait a moment. Militaire turned sharply to her teacher, wanting to know something. Surprised, the man turned to the girl and grew curious about what she wanted from him. After she asked whether they had plans for tomorrow, the man said he had absolutely nothing planned. Inspired, she said they could then spend the evening alone together. Darrett shook hands with the man, who was pleased to meet the blacksmith, and said he had heard a lot about Darrett. Rubbing the back of his head, the man said Nana Hikari had fired everyone, so they had to go outside. They were all simply glad to be back with their commander after not seeing one another for so long, and then his voice suddenly took on a different tone, as if he were about to reveal a secret. He explained that many people like Nani Akari could probably break the national treasure he asked about, so that should be punished, and he was just lucky the queen was merciful to him. Senji appeared at his side to remind him it was time to repair the sword, and Durrett was relieved because he had almost forgotten. They approached a bag that was clearly filled with something very large and heavy. Senji suggested using this in the bag that holds steel ore, larval stone, aqua stone, magic fortification stone, and some other small stones. He said he hid it from Nana Hikari because it was better for Durrett, a skilled and passionate blacksmith, to use them. He said that if the man could repair them with a Matsurugi, it would be a great honor for them. Darrett examined the stones more closely and said he could definitely use them. He was pleased to have gotten his hands on such wonderful objects. When the nearby company asked to watch the blacksmith work, the man gladly agreed because they would enjoy watching him. The sword's beauty struck him, and the workmanship was superb and nearly flawless. Remembering how he made the sword, he praised himself because it had turned out very well. Suddenly he paused and seriously wondered if he could surpass his former self. It wasn't certain he could repair a sword as well as he had in his youth. Nearby, the whole team watched the man prepare to work, eager for him to begin. Pulling on his gloves, he realized worrying was pointless and decided to think about other things, for example, exactly how to fix the sword. He worked long and patiently, like a real blacksmith. The suffering went on, but by then it was too late to retreat. The sword was ready very quickly. The nearby crowd was pleasantly surprised that the man handled it so quickly. They were always surprised by how fast the man works. 3 young blacksmiths tried to steal the exact method he used to repair the sword, learn what he had done, and become his apprentices. They wanted to be as great as Darrett, which embarrassed him. Standing nearby, Militari smiled brightly and said her teacher was very popular, feeling proud of him as if he were her own father. Embarrassed, he asked her not to exaggerate his abilities, then remembered Sinan standing beside him looking angry and smiled awkwardly, as if guilty about the attention. Dorrit said he should focus on hammer handling first because his skills were weak and he needed more practice. Angry, the man shouted that no one should give him orders because being commanded felt like a serious insult, and he refused to let his pride be hurt. Senji hit him on the head, telling him not to act so arrogant. It was a cruel scene, but no one said anything. Darrett handed the man a hammer and told him to strike a sheet of metal, warning him not to hit his fingers because he could be seriously injured. Suddenly, he grabbed the hammer. The nearby crowd didn't believe in him or his abilities and refused to accept that he could cope. Sinan raised his hammer over the metal, ready to strike, determined to put his offenders in their place and prove he had real talent. The attempt failed and he still hit his finger, as expected from someone like him. Pain shot through his finger and he rolled on the floor screaming. Darrett asked if the man was okay, and Sinan said not to approach him because he was very angry, especially at Darrett, and jealous of the blacksmith and the attention he was getting. Senji hit him again and told him not to swing the hammer. People nearby started whispering, confused by Sinan's behavior and clearly disliking the scene before them. The man shouted that they shouldn't look down on him, and Durrett realized it would be very difficult for him because a student that crazy was a different challenge. That evening, everyone went to the bar to toast the appointment of the new Mr. Durrett, a bright event that made everyone happy. They raised their glasses and shouted they would drink to the last drop, feeling happy and wanting to forget all their problems for the evening. Military gaze grew darker, which made her want to know something, and that evening she was clearly unhappy and her face did not hide it. She asked why Delan Comfy were there, since she had expected to be left alone with the man and to spend the evening with him. Direct said he had invited them and that a blacksmith and some soldiers were there. The girl was angry. She had dreamed of a romantic evening, not drinking with men. Acting without thinking, she grabbed the mug and drank quickly. Comfit tried to stop her commander from drinking so fast, but it was already too late and she could not be stopped. She slammed the mug down and told him not to irritate her, the beer spilling slightly over the rim, but Military had no plans to stop, and once she started she would drink until the very end. Thinking about alcohol brought back her dreaded dolls, the 25 and the 40, two small homemade dolls that nestled snugly on her belt. Too late to stop her, the alcohol in her blood made her act without thinking, and she began to play with dolls, which greatly surprised the man beside her, who rarely showed any reaction even when drunk. The nearby team thought her new doll was cute. They did not judge her hobby. Instead, they supported her as best they could and celebrated with her. Confi said she will play like this until she goes to bed and warned that anyone who touches her will get in trouble. Somehow the image of the militarium commander vanished from Daret's mind, and he no longer saw her as a serious woman giving orders to her subordinates. Del turned to the man and said she had heard about his duel with another blacksmith, and it had worried her, so she wanted reassurance. She thanked him and pointed out he had made a fine weapon for Confa, and Dara said it was just his job while trying to downplay the praise because he would not admit he was a great blacksmith. The girl told him not to be modest, saying that thanks to the wonderful sword she had defeated a very strong man. The man denied it, claiming it was all Confi's training. The girl looked at them with wide-open eyes, like a child looking at her parents with big doll eyes. Suddenly she stepped up to him and asked if he would make a weapon for himself, fascinated because the idea of Mr. Duret having a weapon was so unusual and striking. Duret looked embarrassed and said he was not an adventurer and did not need weapons. As an ordinary blacksmith, he did not plan to fight like many in their city. Militara wondered why not, and now she was determined to convince the man that a homemade weapon was a great idea and that he should at least consider it. She said if he used his own weapon, people would clearly see its quality, which would be great, and everyone would want to order weapons from him. The man thought it over, realized it made sense even though he wasn't completely sure, and knew he had to consider it carefully before refusing. Her words made him see the doll he treated like a weapon, the one holding a spoon, as his personal weapon, and he nearly agreed to the adventure. Standing in the street before the crowd, Militania announced that Mr. Jarrett would make a weapon for himself, which pleased everyone who had come to listen to her. She said it would help him defend himself. The man said owning a weapon would let him improve his blacksmithing skills. The nearby crowd began to cheer at the idea, pleased he would make a weapon for himself, and certain it would be remarkable because they never doubted the great blacksmith's skill. Smiling warmly, the man thanked everyone for their support. Then a shout in English sounded nearby, and the crowd fell silent. Sinan shouted that everyone had forgotten him and hated it, calling it unfair and wanting all the attention that Direct got. He shouted that he also needed a weapon and demanded to know why only Doret, insisting he was worthy to carry the great weapon she alone could make. Suddenly someone grabbed his ear again and pulled him hard to stop him from speaking foolishly. Senji sent him back to work with the hammer, far better than letting him open his mouth. No one was embarrassed or surprised. They expected it because someone like that had to be stopped in time. Derek gave an awkward smile, not sure whether to laugh or cry. Where are the Gloss Army's houses? Derek dug through the boxes, searching hard for the item he needed. He picked up 2 stones and realized this material would be much more suitable. By looking at them, he already knew what he would and would not need. Searching other boxes, he found more items that would help him. Every small thing in the warehouse helped his work and made him happy. Malita asked whether he planned to use A-rank materials and reminded him he could use them without hesitation because no one would object. The man declined, saying a low rank would be enough and he did not want high-rank materials. Doret said he wanted to leave the good things for the soldiers because he couldn't keep everything for himself and the people around him needed it much more. The phrase revealed how good he was to the girl, and she opened her eyes wide at the noble man standing before her with a kind heart and a generous soul. She shrank and began to tremble. Surprised, the man turned and could not understand why her behavior had changed so suddenly, and he was frightened for a moment. Wiping her tears with a handkerchief, she said her teacher was a very noble man and could not imagine how vast the soul of the person in front of her was. She replied flatly that she was overestimating his abilities, then said he had taken everything he needed and was ready to go, already impatient to start working on his weapon. People crowded around the man, all curious about the weapon he would make and ready to help or offer ideas. Scratching his head, he said he had many ideas but didn't know what to make. From the crowd, a very loud female voice suggested making a sword. The girl said proudly she could help with sword training. Her hope was to make her teacher her student and repay him by helping the way he once had. Sighing, the man admitted he did not believe he could control the sword. He wasn't sure this was a good idea and pictured himself clumsily trying to wield a heavy sword and failing. Duret pulled on a glove and said he would rather be doing something else. Militano looked surprised and did not immediately understand what he meant, but he stayed silent and picked up a hammer. After showing it to everyone, he said he would use a hammer as a weapon and smiled, already picturing how he would make and use his own weapon. The nearby crowd was stunned. Everyone had pictured some kind of weapon, but not a hammer, and the idea shocked them. The man said that as a blacksmith he uses it often, so it will be more familiar and the most convenient weapon for him. Threat added that because he was used to swinging a hammer, he would be much better at using it as a weapon and would find it easier to learn to use it. The crowd understood that this was the most a blacksmith could offer, so they backed any idea he had and were pleased by such a clever weapon. After working steadily for some time, he revealed a huge hammer to the crowd. The hammer looked heavy but solid and reliable. Everyone in the crowd was stunned by the size and quality of the man's work. They hadn't expected such a high standard, and they liked what they saw. Looking over his work, he thought it looked good and said only a name was needed before the weapon would be fully ready to use. Militana stepped closer and suggested a great name for the man's new weapon. Everyone was sure the commander would give the sword a cool name because she was the best at naming weapons. Proudly, she suggested the name Doretta's hammer, certain it would please everyone standing beside her now. Silence fell over the room, even Doret. Everyone stood frozen in shock at that name. The crowd began shouting loudly, pleased with the name, but he, unlike the man, definitely disliked it and called it terrible. People cheered that it was a cool name that suited the weapon and clearly liked it. He disliked it, but he couldn't say so because several pairs of eyes were on him, waiting for him to comment on the name. After a few minutes of silence, he said to let it remain so. He could not let the crowd's bright hopes be ruined by refusing that name, however terrible. The whole crowd screamed in joy. Doret was glad to see them so happy. Now the most important thing for him was that everyone felt that way. Direct Tamer, channel magic into a hammer blow to deliver the force of a falling meteor. A few weeks later, at the second training area, in the middle of a field, a man practiced swinging a hammer, building his strength so it would be easier to use the weapon later. A man nearby encouraged Doret, saying he was doing very well. Doret thanked him and wiped beads of sweat from his forehead after a hard workout. The instructor explained you must let go of the sword promptly during a strike and be more careful, because in that position you are very vulnerable afterward, and Doret said he understood everything. The young man said a hammer, unlike a sword, could be used as a shield, and that the man needed to practice defense, and Direct replied he had hopes for him. At the very start of training, his body wouldn't obey and he could barely move, making training very difficult for him. Without thinking, he swung his hammer again, the motion confident and powerful, as if he were striking the enemy standing before him. Things are much better now. His body has started to obey. Movements and swings are no longer so difficult, and he was very happy that his training time had not been wasted. Shouting encouragement, the man told the other he was doing very well, added that he was genuinely happy for his new friend's success, and believed his skills would keep improving. His blacksmith experience made the hammer easier to handle than he expected, so he chose the weapon that suited him perfectly. He trained a bit longer until they both decided to take a break, since the man trains almost all day. Giving a heavy sigh, Doret sat under the shade of a huge tree to rest a little after a hard workout with his hammer. A girl suddenly appeared beside him, told him he had done a very good job, and walked proudly beside him as if she had been watching his training for a long time. Militar said he had no free time because of all the training, and Doret was glad to see the girl since familiar faces are always welcome. She added that thanks to him, all the soldiers were happy to learn from him and spend time with him, and he was their authority and the example they should aspire to. Glancing at the nearby guys practicing with training swords, he saw someone running, a group doing push-ups, and everyone busy with their own routines. Smiling at the powerful sight, he suddenly fixed his gaze on the girl's belt because something hidden under her cloak had drawn him. Two man-shaped toys hung there. She still carried them, which surprised him. Two versions, aged 25 and 40. The picture surprised and moved him at once. Military asked to sit next to him, and he agreed quickly. Always glad to have pleasant company nearby, he finds time with someone much better than being alone. Dorette wondered whether he had really thought it through. Those days were packed with events, despite the constant danger and the adventures he endured. He realized that without her letter, he could not imagine what would have become of his life. After being cruelly fired, he might have lived in far worse conditions. He seemed to have discovered a new world he truly wanted to explore. The man realized things could not go on like this. A cry that trouble had come interrupted his thoughts, and the couple looked at the person who had broken their silence. The young soldier hurried to find his commander, saying trouble had come, and his frightened face made clear the situation was serious and needed the captain's intervention. The girl jumped up and asked what had happened, her voice turning stern as she shifted swiftly between rest and work because she had to act fast. The man began to say that in the forest of stone trees, we encountered steel bears and other special monsters identified as rank threats. They were among the most dangerous creatures that could appear in the forest, so the situation was extremely serious. Hearing all this, the couple were shocked and realized they needed to act quickly before things got much worse. The couple entered a city in chaos, where people were running, grabbing belongings, and trying to save themselves and their loved ones. Dorrit asked what kind of monsters they were. Militer remembered she hadn't told the blacksmith about the monsters, since he probably didn't know the most important events. Simply put, they are far smarter and more aggressive than normal monsters, so ordinary adventurers should not approach them again. The man said he was hearing about these monsters for the first time, and the girl explained that such monsters are very rare, so little is known about them. She added that these monsters will attack without warning, as if they hate people. The moment they see someone they try to kill, they do not think. Driven only by instinct, they are very dangerous to people. Jarrett looked surprised and asked whether it was really that bad. The girl confirmed his concern, saying not everyone could handle these bears and they could cost someone's life. Jaw clenched, the man was scared by the information and finally realized how serious everything was. Militanic stepped closer and, ashamed to ask but determined, asked if the man could go with her, fearing the answer but willing to take the risk. Bowing his head, the man was silent for a moment. Then when he regained consciousness, he asked why they needed him there, saying he was no good as a warrior for such a task. A military leader stood at the head of the entire crowd and loudly announced that everyone knew. The arrival of steel bears in the stone trees forest was a serious threat because they could easily harm people nearby. She added that these bears' ability is steel armor, so the girl orders everyone to aim at the unarmored weak spots to help win against the monsters. To conclude her speech, she said the materials obtained from killing the bears could be used to make weapons. Militana said Durrett would go with them. The soldiers welcomed the news and felt their spirits lift, trusting that the man could help them in hard times even though he was not a warrior. Smiling, the man said it was a great chance for him to test his skills and the results of his training, and that you would be happy to work with them. Militana warned that the bears' bodies were very strong, that regular attacks would barely harm them, and that they had to use every possible advantage to defeat such dangerous monsters. Ordering everyone to remember it, she was met with a loud, positive response from all the soldiers at once. They understood how serious it was and had no right to argue. Once aboard the transport, the whole team set off. A large group of soldiers moved into the forest to destroy the monsters. A few hours later, he noticed it was already too dark, which bothered him because fighting at night was much harder than in daylight. The team reached the forest of stone trees and stopped. They need a plan to avoid being quickly overwhelmed by the bears and must not act without thinking. Militana ordered them to split up and search for the bears, and the soldiers agreed loudly. Everyone raced off in different directions to explore the whole forest and every hidden corner they could reach. Stepping forward, the girl said it was time to go, gathered her strength, and prepared to lead her small group and protect them with her life. A small group walked through a dark forest that offered no welcome, its hostile mood frightening them and making it clear people did not belong there. Shaking, Confai said quietly that a real battle was much scarier than she expected, and training felt completely different from a real bear hunt. Direct admitted he was a little nervous, which surprised the girl, and she had assumed a man his age feared nothing, but she was wrong. The man continued, saying they had nothing to fear because nothing was happening right now, and there was no point in worrying, at least for now. Militer stayed with them, and Confi realized he was right. They were safe beside the girl because she was much stronger than both of them and could defeat the bears. The commander said they also carried 2 holy weapons that would help them win the battle against the bears. Doretta's hammer and sword. Militara explained that it ignores all damage except holy, and only weapons made by Doret have the holy element, the hammer itself and the girl's sword. She added that the former blacksmith was made from the same materials, but he could do nothing, so he was useless. This was a cue to her teacher. Anyone not too lazy wanted to become his student because it would bring them honor and a little glory. The man understood everything. Doret scratched his chin and realized he needed a weapon with a holy element to defeat the monsters, just as the girl had recently said. Militana agreed with him and said it was good the man was joining them, as that gave them a better chance to win. 2 holy weapons and a strong team gave them a good chance of success. All 3 heard a strange howl and turned sharply. In the forest's silence, every sound grew much louder, so the team reacted quickly. A huge crowd of goblins stood behind them, and all 3 tensed in surprise, because they had not expected to encounter goblins on their way. When Confai started screaming that they would all be eaten, Doret's eyes widened at the sight, and he, clearly not expecting guests in the forest, tensed up and realized he didn't know what to do. The militant counted them and reported there were 5. She assumed their lair was nearby. The goblins had already raised their weapons to attack. Doret asked if they would fight, and the girl answered no, because she clearly intended to do something else. Militana explained that if they felt danger, they should run. She picked up a stone and threw it at the goblins with all her strength to scare them into fleeing as quickly as possible. She hit 3 goblins at once, knocking their weapons from their hands as their small clubs clattered to the ground, and the stone left bumps on their foreheads. Most ran off immediately, but 2 stayed standing and stared sternly at the team, trying to scare them with her gaze. They were clearly not going to retreat easily. Doret paused to think. Seeing everything, a fight would be pointless now, so he chose to focus on something else to avoid getting pulled into another. The goblins raised their weapons and, with a loud cry, prepared to attack, refusing to leave as losers, determination shining in their eyes to defeat the intruders. Terrified, Confi screamed at the sight of even simple creatures like goblins, because she believed she was too weak to face them. Militana stepped forward and told them to stand behind her. When Doret stepped forward instead, Militana was surprised and tensed because she had sworn to protect them, not the other way around. Tightening his grip on his huge hammer, he attacked the goblins, sending them flying several meters away from the team with great speed, as if he had brushed a few specks of dust from a shelf. The girls looked stunned. No one had expected such a heavy blow from the man. Their mouths fell open as they stared at what was unfolding before them. After falling to the ground, the goblins scrambled to their feet and ran, their fear obvious in how fast they fled. Smiling, he began to feel proud, and seeing the results of his training, he had not expected to land such a strong blow, but was clearly pleased. Smiling brightly, the girls watched the picture of the strong man who had saved them, and were delighted by what they had just witnessed. Confess shouted that Mr. Doret was amazing. She called him her hero and savior from the terrible monsters that could easily eat her. Militana said gaining that much strength in just a few weeks is incredible. The training was very useful and has already produced results. Awkwardly smiling, the man thanked them for the many compliments, embarrassed by so much praise but clearly enjoying it. He urged them to move on because they couldn't stop now. Near their goal, very little remained and they had to keep moving. From the depths of the forest came a sudden, inhuman cry that promised nothing good and might have been the bear they needed. Konfa was very frightened and shouted aloud, asking what it was after that inhuman cry, then tried to locate the sound to calm herself. Doret tensed and turned to the military, signaling he was waiting for her instructions because he could not act without a direct order from his captain and was not to take any unnecessary action. The girl ordered them to stay vigilant because they do not fully understand what this is about, so they can be on guard and protect each other. The forest was empty, the screen stopped, and the silence became oppressive, getting worse because the quiet after that scream made everything feel even more frightening and tense. The team peered into the forest for any sign of danger and to see exactly what was threatening them now, since they needed to know what they would be defending themselves against. Spotting something, Militana shouted in panic and ordered everyone to lie on the ground so they could act quickly. A huge tree flew toward them at high speed, capable of killing anyone it hit, thrown by someone extremely strong. A huge mark scarred the ground, and a long ditch-like hole opened like a riverbed, which was frightening because the tree could hit someone. Militana stayed calm while everyone else was scared, because she had to lead the team, and as commander she had to keep her composure no matter what. Approaching the boys, she asked whether everything was okay. Doret answered uncertainly that it was okay, but the sight had frightened him. He slowly regained his breath. Conf thanked the captain in tears for saving her. The girl turned and grew cautious. It was not over yet. She sensed the danger and braced for a blow from any direction. Deep in the forest, something reappeared, slowly moving toward the people, poised to leap at any moment and strike silently and swiftly before they could notice. Out of the dark forest, an iron bear emerged on two legs, clad in shining armor, a menacing figure that made clear it was a dangerous monster. Direct was stunned by the bear's huge size. He hadn't expected it to be so big and was terrified because a single swipe of its paw could kill. Militana did not wait and ordered Confet to act. The girl answered uncertainly and then took the whistle to blow and call someone for help. They needed people. Everyone in the forest heard the sound, realized someone needed help, and ran toward it urgently before it was too late to save a life. Militana stepped forward and said proudly she would fight because no one on her team should face the bear since it was too dangerous. Turning to her shin with the sword, she slowly drew it from its sheath, the blade glowing with a soft light that shone into the dark forest. The sword gleamed, ready for battle. Standing firm, the girl prepared to protect those behind her. Letting them be harmed was not an option. The sword in the girl's hand glowed with a magical light, and Darrett was stunned, having never seen a weapon shine so brightly. Standing bravely in front of the bear, she pointed her sword at him. She is not ready to lose and is determined to protect her comrades and keep them from harm. In an instant, she vanished from everyone's sight, leaving the man stunned as if she had evaporated into thin air. Using her skilled divine flash, the soldier landed several blows, stunned the nearby couple, and flew into the air above the bear. Standing on the ground, she inspected her work, but it did no good. The bear in his armor had not a single scratch, which frustrated her deeply. She could not believe her powerful attack had failed. It usually defeated anyone, but this time it did not even leave a scratch. The bear stepped aside and began uprooting the tree as its roots slowly crawled out of the ground. Militano was shocked. She hadn't expected the monster to use such an attack. Holding a huge tree, the bear swung it at the girl almost without thinking, and whistling stones flew straight at her, closing in and threatening to cause serious wounds. Calm and unafraid, the girl was ready for any attack. She had earned her role as commander of the guard, knew what to do in such situations, and kept her face calm. One swing repelled the monster's attack. A single swing of her sword sent all the stones flying back as if there had been no attack. Her body did not tense at all. Dorette was pleasantly surprised at how easily she repelled the powerful attack. Her attacker certainly did not expect that from a girl who looked so cute, but she was much stronger than she appeared at first glance. Confi began shouting praises for her captain. Confi was certain the girl could handle such an attack. Confi trusted the girl's strength and had no doubt. Militaru said it's not that simple, because the higher a monster's rank, the smarter it is, and that makes it much harder to defeat. Standing on his hind legs, the bear charged the girl head-on. Militano was surprised by the sudden change in tactics. She did not at first realize how quickly he had regained his bearings. She had to believe she would succeed and trust her own strength, because as a commander she could not let her team down. Ready for anything, the girl took a fighting stance. Militana swung her sword, but the bear bit down on the blade. Despite her efforts, she could not pull the sword free from the beast's jaws. The bear held the sword tightly with its sharp teeth. When the girl reached for the sword, Confi shouted at her to be careful, very worried about her commander with that image before her eyes. Darrett saw the bear raise its huge clawed paw to attack, so he tightened his grip on the hammer, knowing the girl would suffer if he did nothing. He stepped forward to help as quickly as he could, because he couldn't let the commander handle it completely on his own. A single swing of his hammer pushed the bear away from Militaire, who flew back several meters and dropped the girl's sword. Militaru thanked her for saving him. The man said it was too soon to relax. Tension still ran through his muscles. He was ready for anything that might happen. Confess shouted uncertainly that she would run to fetch the other soldiers, hoping to help and be at least a little useful. The girl told her to stay still as a bear in the background lifted its head, preparing for another devastating attack. The monster advanced toward the girl, directing all its attention at her, the team's weakest and most vulnerable member. Militana acted faster. When the bear attacked, she grabbed Kung Fu, pulled him into her arms, and jumped away, saving him. Fear of the unknown kept the girl's eyes closed, and she was too afraid to open them because she thought she would die. Direct looked around in pain as the girls fell to the ground. Konfa opened her tear-streaked eyes, unable to believe she was still alive. The girl began loudly apologizing to her captain. Militana stood up, said she was actually all right, and was glad the girl was okay. Seeing Militana thrown back, the man realized he could not send her to fight the monster again and had to think of something quickly before it was too late. Realizing help would not arrive soon, the man made a decision. Right now he had to protect the two behind him, and realizing he'd said it wrong, he corrected himself and said he simply had to do it. Bracing himself, he tightened his grip on the hammer, knowing he had to act before it was too late to protect his friends. The bear rose up on its hind legs and turned to face the man, who was determined to destroy the monster and was already preparing to attack. A black aura suddenly glowed around the bear, a clear bad sign. Direct was surprised he hadn't expected to see this on a bear. He realized it was like the material's imperfections, allowing him to see where things were wrong and to spot every flaw. Darrett felt determined because he could work with materials the same way and see exactly where something was broken. The bear attacked, and the man used his hammer like a massive shield to block the creature's huge clawed paw. The man could see the weak points, but the attack forced him to shield himself with his hammer, which greatly hindered him. The monster raised its clawed paw to destroy the blacksmith. With one powerful blow, it stood ready to kill and tear him apart. Militana grew worried about her teacher, but Rhett tightened his grip on the hammer as it glowed with magical light, and he planned to use it. Channeling all his magic into the weapon, he was blinded by its bright light that lit everything around him. The weapon left a huge hole in the ground where the remains of a giant bear lay, a bear the man had defeated so easily. Dorette stared at all of it, unable to understand what had just happened, and he looked around with wide eyes, unable to believe he had done all this himself. Militaris's scream came from above. She asked if her teacher was okay, and he said he was fine, though he sat there in shock. The man couldn't understand what he had just done. When he went down the hole, the girl said he really did not remember. Such a feat would be hard for her to forget. During the attack, she said a very bright light filled the place. Darrod asked whether a hole had really appeared after that, and the girl confirmed it. He was stunned that he could do that. It felt amazing, and he was genuinely shocked by his own abilities. Infai suddenly threw herself into his arms, screaming and crying. Dorette was relieved the man was all right, smiled awkwardly, and apologized for making him worry. Injured, Militana pulled her cloak back over her shoulders. In front of her team, she kept a professional expression. Smiling, she said she would handle the guards and joined a small group to sort things out and negotiate. Men around the hole said the hammer strike looked spectacular. Nothing remained of the bear. They thought it looked like a falling meteorite. Confi hugged him as Dorrit gently stroked her hair to calm her, understanding how worried she was about him and letting her cry out her feelings. What matters most to him is that both girls are safe and he could protect them. Knowing they are safe and sound warms his soul. A couple of days later, the military man turns to his mentor and asks if he is okay, since he had suffered a bit then too. Duru said his bones still hurt, but he would live, and the girl said she had almost completely recovered and felt proud of that. The man thinks it's wonderful to be young, but he sometimes regretted doing such things at his age. He asked if the stone forest was under guard now. The girl was surprised and thought the question strange. Terrified, Dorette thought he would have to pay for all the damage he caused there, and when he realized he could not afford those costs, he grew even more frightened. Surprised again, Militana laughed, told him it was nothing and he should not worry, and was amused by the man's reaction to his defeat. Explaining that it would now be a reminder of the blacksmith's power for future generations surprised Dare. He hadn't expected to become an example for the future. It was amazing. Militana said everyone now calls the man Darrett the Punisher, which was good because that title could bring several advantages. Tension filled the room. No one knew how to respond to those words. Changing the subject, he noticed the noise outside and assumed everyone was in a fighting mood, which pleased him. The soldiers trained hard. They all wanted to be as strong as Darrett. They were determined to train as hard as they could. Militana noticed his feat made a strong impression on all the young soldiers. This surprised him. He had certainly not expected to become such an example for everyone. While acting as Khan for Ran, she spotted a nearby couple she hadn't expected to see and was pleased to find them there. With your hand to her head and standing at attention, the girl thanked him for his hard work and told the captain their goal was to run 10,000 laps. Durrett felt confused and alarmed by the number of laps. He could not believe they would actually run exactly 10,000 laps. It seemed impossible. Militana said the training is tiring but sometimes useful, so the knights can practice calmly until they are completely tired. The girl ran up to her commander and turned to him, as if she had something very important to say. The couple looked surprised and asked whether something had happened or whether she had already run all the laps, and Confi said it was not like that while light footsteps were heard nearby. The girl said that a guest from the Gross Magic Academy had arrived. Surprised, Militana did not expect the guest to arrive so soon and had thought he would come later. A pretty girl approached them smiling, and said she and Darrett hadn't seen each other for 15 years. Surprised, the man realized he had no idea who stood before him, and no matter how hard he looked, he could not remember. After Nana Hikari was banished, two voices spoke. One asked the agent how the plan was going, and the agent replied that the plan had failed. A girl said that a skilled blacksmith named Darrett had become the only blacksmith for Groza's army. The gentleman said good luck was unacceptable. The agent bowed her head and said she was very sorry she had spoken honestly, because lying to the gentleman would cost you more. The Lord realized she was a crucial pawn, and losing her now would not leave him in the most advantageous position. He says he'll give his agent one last chance. It's rare to get that kind of kindness from him. Closing her eyes, the girl thanked her master for the generosity, relieved to be alive and spared pain, and grateful for a second chance to correct her mistakes. A rough voice ordered her not to waste it, and she had no answer, so she agreed silently because her life depended on it. When Dorette asked who she was, the girl grew very angry, hurt at being forgotten and ready to take offense, but she was no longer a child. Smiling without warmth, she introduced herself as Isa, as if her name should tell the whole story for her. An evil aura settled over Dorette, and a slow realization came as he began to remember old events he had completely forgotten. He suggested they had played together long ago, and Issa happily agreed, taking his hands and saying she was very glad to meet him again. Speaking softly, she said she had been thinking about Mr. Dorita the whole time and could not stop thinking about him. Militaru stepped between them and asked the girl to leave the man alone. Seeing how tired the man was, she tried to move the intrusive girl away from her teacher. Seeing the toys on her belt, Essa said the girl treated the belt like a toy, which made her laugh a lot because she thought it was a very stupid activity. Covering her smile with her hand, she laughed because Militaire was behaving like a child, which angered the other girl. That girl was ready to kill her rival right now, not thinking about the people around her. In a stern voice, she said she had been thinking the moment to settle the score would soon come, and now it had, and with her fists clenched, she was almost ready for battle. They would never be friends. Conflict flashed between them, and a hostile aura surrounded them. Darrett smiled awkwardly, urged everyone to calm down, and asked Issa what had brought her here, curious because she had appeared so unexpectedly. Brightening, the girl ran to the man and said she really needed his advice, but someone's shout quickly interrupted her. A man ran up to them, and Aizu explained that the man was his deputy. The man said he was very pleased to meet him, and the deputy said he did not think this old man was the best blacksmith. He showed his disapproval and asked, wondering whether she would dare contradict him. On his return, he threatened a private conversation with her. That one phrase nearly ruined the impression he had made. Nearby, Militaire ordered the deputy to retract his words and personally vouched for Dorrit's skill, refusing to let anyone insult the man's strength because he was a truly great blacksmith. His face changed dramatically. He said he was very glad to see the commander and told her she looked great as always. She thought the compliment was stupid. Dorette found the old man terrifying and wondered whether he noticed how he looked. A loud scream cut through his thoughts. Sinan rushed over and said he had followed the instructions, but the tool still broke, leaving him angry and ready to scold and blame the whole world for his failures. Dorette turned at the shout and saw the blow the man had landed on his face, surprised because the man had appeared suddenly and made a claim. Senji bowed slightly and apologized for his behavior and for the tools being broken. The man had asked that the tools remain intact, and Senji felt deeply ashamed that they had been broken. The deputy smiled oddly, switched on a sign, turned around, and rudely asked what they wanted from him, clearly not in the mood to answer questions. Arms open in a playful hug, the man said he couldn't believe someone so remarkable was sitting out here in the wilderness, implying that such a great person did not belong in such a simple place. People nearby were stunned. They hadn't expected to hear such things about Sinan. To them, he was just a spoiled fool who demanded too much and did nothing. The deputy offered the man a job as his special instructor, saying it too confidently, as if he'd known the blonde and his talents for years. This role seemed perfect for him because his appearance suggested he was made for this kind of work, and he would like it. With his hands raised, he boasted he was a true genius and tried to prove to everyone he belonged among the greats, as if he had always been that way. Proudly, the man said they needed to return to school to sort out the necessary documents. ESA tried to stop him because it was all a very bad joke. Angrily, the deputy said that when he returned, he would wait for the girl in his room and did not intend to speak with her again. Sinan started bragging, telling Durit this showed the difference in their abilities and urging him to humble himself, and Durit began to think himself great, as if others saw a talent in him that no one else had. Both of them disappeared suddenly, leaving everyone in the company stunned, and they did not fully understand what had happened, but decided not to discuss it. Gross Army Base. Militara placed a cup of tea on the table and offered it to the guest. Durrett smiled awkwardly and said the deputy was very hard to work with, clearly shown by his behavior and poor manners. Essa sighed and admitted he was completely right, while she apologized politely for the commotion and said she was truly ashamed of what the deputy had caused. Remembering that the girl had been named Supreme Master, the man told her she should be proud, and she lowered her head in embarrassment. She credited the staff Durrett himself made for all of it. Surprised, the man wondered what kind of staff he had made, since he could not remember making anything like it. Esa showed it on impulse because she knew Darrett had made it. A staff appeared in her hands, the staff of the great magician Diwando, a fifth-rank weapon with the light attribute. He looked at the staff in his hands and could not remember ever doing anything like it, and no matter how closely he examined the small details, no memories connected to the staff came to mind. Isaac said the staff was made long ago and has been improved many times, so its appearance may not match the original. Durrett was surprised, and he wondered how he could call it his creation after it had been changed so many times, ashamed to claim it entirely as his weapon. Putting those thoughts aside, the man asked what the girl wanted to talk about. Issa replied that the academy was running courses on studying the holy attribute. For that reason, she asked him to create staffs with a sacred attribute, and he replied that he would definitely handle the task, so the girl thanked him happily. Militaria said she was very interested in studying the holy attribute and had been for a long time, so she wanted to study it with other students. Having no urgent matters, she asked to take a look, and Essa agreed, suggesting they go to the academy right away. Dorette asked them to wait because he had to get his hammer, since such an important tool could not be left unattended. Using her instant teleportation, Isaac reached where they needed to be as quickly as possible. When they arrived, the girl welcomed them to the Grossmatch Academy. They stood in awe at the sight before them. The beautiful gardens and the academy's grand, elegant building were utterly mesmerizing. As suggested, I started by greeting the director, one of the academy's most important representatives. This was the necessary procedure before visiting the students themselves. Seated at the table, the pretty girl greeted the team, said she was glad to meet them, and introduced herself as Alina Grossa, director of the educational institution. Militar said she hadn't seen Alina in a long time, and Alina said she was glad to see Militar in good health. They were clearly familiar and greeted each other warmly. Darrett introduced himself and said he was glad to meet him, then suddenly thought of something and several questions came to mind. The principal said she heard that Direct had made a magical staff with a holy attribute and hopes the man can help her students study it. Isa said the girl was Her Majesty's sister. The man was surprised and saw how alike they were. Both were fair-haired, tall beauties who drew men's attention. Elena smiled and said she is friendly to those who work well, strict with the lazy, and expects results from Mr. Darrett. The girl was about to introduce him to her students when a loud cry calling Izu interrupted them, and everyone was slightly frightened because the cry was so unexpected. A deputy nearby was upset that the girl had not come into his room when she returned and asked why she had brought this misunderstanding with her. Sinan asked rudely what such a common gray thing was doing here. Feeling the crown on his head, he openly insulted everyone he passed. Durrett sighed heavily. His terrible headache left him unwilling to deal with someone who could not do anything on his own, and he just wanted to rest. Without warning, someone grabbed Izu's hand and pulled it toward them, shocking Durrett and Militaru, who had not expected such a bold, forward move, and it made them uneasy and worried about the girl. The girl tried to pull her hand free from the deputy's clutches, screamed for them to let her go, while a deputy smiled sarcastically and said she did not dare to contradict him, and Direct clenched his teeth in anger. Letting go of the man's hand, the blacksmith shouted that his status did not allow him to act that way, and his strong build made it clear he was no weakling and could break any limb if necessary. The deputy responded indignantly, saying he was one of the academy's senior sages and that it was shameful to grab his hand like that. Dorrit explained the man probably would not do anything Ezu disliked, and the deputy, frightened, said he understood everything and that everyone here was clearly stronger than him. Sinan told the man to run before it was too late, while the deputy fled to save his life. The man started to run off, shouting for Durrit to heed his advice and not do anything stupid, but he still ran after the deputy. They fell silent, unsure what to say after that stressful event. No one wanted to talk about it, but they could not ignore what had happened. The military asked how the girl was feeling. Direct shouted that all of this should be told to the director immediately because she would probably be able to come up with something and help. Determined to support Isa, the couple decided to tell the director everything. Isa thanked them but chose not to help. Smiling, she said she was perfectly fine. Her gaze went dark as she said she'd already grown used to it. Her face made clear this had been going on for a very long time. Both the Ret and the military looked at her sadly. They felt sorry for Issa now. To change the subject, the girl clapped her hands. Eager to introduce the couple to her students, she is confident they will please the crowd. Pointing to the day, ESA said they were now part of this audience and invited them to enter.